Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Creepy stuff from Mediterranean countries. I'll share what I have. Can keep them coming if you're interested. Be some random farmer about 80 plus years ago. Summer night, outside with the cattle and a couple other farmers. Chilling and having something to eat, smoking and talking about random stuff. Hear faint sounds in the distance. Think nothing of it. Sounds increasing in volume and can be distinguished now. Faint voices and whispers. Put out the fire because we don't want any issues. Partner grabs his hunting rifle. See something red glowing in the woods. Looks like a big group of people in a straight line. Rifle partner drops the weapon and tells us to hide. It's dangerous to be outside because of the Civil War, so we don't argue with him and move to a dip next to the dirt road that goes through the forest. Voices get closer but can't distinguish what they're saying. There's silence all of a sudden. We're holding our breath, crouching, and the rifle guy is praying in silence. I move a bit so that I can get a clear view of the road. See a group of people. Call them people, but they're not people. More like faint shadows. The kind of thing you're not able to see if you're looking directly at it and have to use the corner of your eye. The red lights we saw before are candle lights. Go back to the group in the eerie silence. The rifle guy has his eyes closed. The other dude is confused, but terrified. Start hearing the same voices as before, but it's coming from a different part of the forest. The rifle guy loses it and starts sobbing. I can hear sounds again, everything going back to normal. The rifle guy tells us to wait for a bit. After a few minutes, he stands up, grabs a rifle and starts heading back to the village. Refuses to tell us anything about that night. Other guy tells me he thinks he knows what it was but isn't sure, and because of the nature of what it could be, he prefers not to say anything. The rifle guy falls ill a couple of days after that night, ends up dying in a week.
I live on a little island in the middle of the Mediterranean called Malta. At the time that I had my experience, I was 17 years old. Now I am 21. I used to work in a small cafeteria in the middle of our capital city, Valletta. The cafeteria basically consisted of an old basement and 2 levels. The basement was used as a store, the ground floor had the bar and a few fridges, and the top level had 3 or 4 tables for patrons to use. The funny thing about the place was that the shop was actually a very small part of an old palace. The basement was the only original part, while the other 2 levels were actually 1 level divided with some beams and a wooden flooring. The stairs, which led upstairs or downstairs, were exactly on top of each other. Due to the lack of light, there weren't any back windows. The architect decided to remove the back part of the stairs that led upstairs so that light could illuminate the stairs underneath. We used to work at 3 in this cafeteria. The manager and one of us used to leave at 2, while the other stayed until 6 in the evening. This was done in turns between my colleague and me. Now, let's come to the actual experience. I never actually saw anything, but I felt and saw shadows. In the afternoon, as soon as the others left, I used to sit on the stairs, which led upstairs. Like this, I had a good view of the door for the cafe. After a few moments, I would always feel like someone ran into the cafe and went straight for the stairs downstairs. The creepy thing is that I saw a shadow on the glass of the fridge. I would then have the feeling that someone went downstairs. I would always creep out and immediately stand up from the stairs. After it happened a few times, I stopped sitting on the said stairs. The really creepy thing was that I was sure that I would never talk to anyone about it, because I was sure that they would make fun of me. One morning I was a bit late because I missed the bus, so when I went and my colleagues were already there. While I was going to put my bag downstairs, I heard my colleague mumbling a story to my manager. She seemed quite frightened. I stopped in my tracks just to hear her describe my exact experience to my manager. She said every detail that I saw. I never said anything to them cause I didn't want to create a fuss about it, but to this day, when I remember that feeling, my eyes get teary.
I am an American with 3rd-generation Sicilian blood. I won't give my last name, but it literally translates to fish. My family has been a part of Sicily for so long I believe there is a town there named after us. We've been fishermen since the Romans, I think. And even after we moved to America, we kept fishing until my dad was born. I don't super believe in past lives or ancestral help, so I've never assumed my fascination with the ocean was much more than just liking the water. I only bring this up because I've got a medium friend who thinks it could be related. But I don't know. I grew up in California and absolutely loved the ocean. I wanted to be as close to it as I could. My grandfather passed away and so I didn't grow up fishing at all, but I was weirdly comforted by it. Anyways, one day I got to go with my mom on a business trip to Monaco. It was my first time leaving America, and I didn't realize it, but it was gonna be my first time in the Mediterranean Sea. I remember the night that we arrived, there was a huge company party at the hotel we were staying at, but I couldn't focus on what was going on. I needed to go. I was feeling super weird, not like anxiety, but like there was something I was forgetting. I told my mom I'd be right back and went to the front of the hotel. I wasn't totally sure what I was doing, but I felt like I had to go. As soon as I got away from the hotel, I looked up and saw the reddest, largest harvest moon I had ever seen. I felt like a shock ran through me. Like I wasn't supposed to be seeing it, but I couldn't look away. And then like that, I felt pulled to the ocean. I took off my shoes and walked onto the beach. If you don't know, Monaco does not have naturally sandy beaches, they're all incredibly rocky, but it was like I could feel the pain of the rocks, but I had to keep moving toward the ocean. There was a man there, and I remember him saying something to me, but I can't remember what it was too dark to make out what he looked like. I walked past him and kept going till he reached the ocean and the water was up to my knees. I kept looking up at the red moon. I don't know how long I was there for, but I remember feeling whole while I was there. I remember not wanting to leave, like I was supposed to be here and any time I wasn't would be wasted. It was like a weird inner euphoria. When I did eventually pull away, it was like I was snapped back to reality. My feet hurt from the rocks, I wanted my jacket. I remember thinking, WTF are you doing out here barefoot in an ocean you don't know in the middle of the night? And I ran back. Nothing like that has ever happened again. Have you been through anything like that? It felt like a trance.
This is a true story, though I still can't believe it happened to me. It's the time when I used to serve on ships in the capacity of a cadet. That was my first and last FG ship. FG stands for foreign going. Ship's name was MV Spar Ruby. Whole crew was Indian. I still remember March 2006. We were passing through the North Atlantic, heading for Trieste, Italy. We were carrying wheat. In that passage, maintenance of hatch covers was due. Hatch covers are the opening of holds in which we carry cargo. Wheat, the same as the cover of some boxes. Weather was very fine, so hatches were partially open for number 1 hold, which is located in the foremost part of the ship, and painting work was going on. As we could not finish the hole on that day, it was kept open so that paint can get dry underneath the cover. At around 10:30 at night, the chief officer rang my cabin and asked me to close the hatch. I changed in my shoes, took a torch, and informed the bridge, from where control of the ship is done, that I'm going on deck. After reaching there, I started the hydro pump and start closing operation. I closed one cover and went forward to close another. Suddenly my torch went out of order. Rather than going back, I informed the bridge on walkie-talkie to switch on forward lights. The third officer was on watch, and he informed me that it'll take 2 or 3 minutes. Meanwhile, I lit one cig. I was enjoying the puffs, when suddenly I heard some scratching noise behind me. I thought there was some malfunction with hatch cover, and I turned back with usual alert, but I completely got frozen to see the view. There was a lady standing in some light clothes. She got short hair, and her face was not so clearly visible. I could not understand how I was able to see her in such a dark. I could not make a single move. I wanted to shout, but such a thin voice was coming out of my mouth. Suddenly she started moving towards me. I wanted to move back, but my feet became like they were nailed on deck. She was continuously moving towards me, but with a slow speed. She took around 30 seconds to cover the distance of around 15 yards between us. Now she was close to me like hell. Her face was just 5 inches ahead of mine, and I saw her very thoroughly. She was such a pretty lady of about 35, maybe from some South American country. In spite of her beautifulness, she was pale yellow. Most strange were her eyes, which were carrying the sadness of the whole world. Until I got comfortable with the situation, all 3 lights of forepart were on. I moved my head towards the light in anticipation, and in hardly a second, I looked back to the lady. No sign of her. I lost consciousness. Pratap, are you all right? I came back with my mind. The chief officer was bending over me and asked me softly as I opened my eyes, The chief officer was a nice guy. He didn't ask a single thing and told everybody to leave the room so that I can rest. He instructed the duty seaman to take care of me in a 2 or 3 hour interval. Next day, I told everything to the chief officer innocently. He told me not to take such things to heart, as it happens due to the heavy workload on ships. I didn't even take that incident seriously and forgot it was a horrible dream. Mid-April next month, we had just loaded steel coils from Alexandria, Egypt. We were heading for the US. It was my duty to go inside the hold every day to take temperatures. It was the 4th day from departure. In the evening, I was doing the job, almost finished. I entered in number 5 hold, reached to the bottom, put the thermometer on the floor, and started noting the readings. All of a sudden, I don't know why I turned back. The same lady was sitting in the space between 2 coils. Same outfit, but today she was weeping. I clearly could see the wet face. I gathered all my courage and asked her who she was. No answer. I again asked, but nothing. I don't know how I could be so brave. I shouted at her, and that should have been avoided. Suddenly, the ship started rolling. We were in the Mediterranean Sea, and that was so unexpected. That can be dangerous due to shifting of steel coils. So a duty seaman who was outside the hatch took down some steps on a ladder and shouted to come up. Again, that attracted my senses, and as I looked back, there was no sign of her. After that incident, that lady became part of my life. She started to appear in the accommodation also. First, I saw her near the crew's toilet after dinner. After some days in the radio room, frequency of her appearance increased. I thought this is the best time to do something because that was affecting my work also. Thousands of times I asked her what you want, in what way I can help you. I have done something wrong with you. But no answers. She used to continuously stare at me. I told everything to the second officer now, who was comparatively close to me. He took everything seriously and made a report to the chief officer, who was apparently angry with me due to my frequent mistakes in work. He told me that I'm pretending to get away from work. The second officer was not happy with this because he knew that I'm sincere with my work. Though he was not believing stories completely, but agreed that something wrong was happening with me. That day he called me in his cabin and we had some vodka. In that drunken state I started crying and told him that maybe this is all psychological, but all is true. And why is it happening to me? I didn't even see the face of that lady before in my life. I haven't done anything wrong with any female in my whole of my life and all that. In that state, I left his cabin and came to mine. I just fell on my bed and went to sleep. After midnight, I felt that somebody was pulling my bedsheet forcefully. I woke up and that was worse. She was standing in front of me. Lights were on and there was mere distance between us. She was in a bluish gown today with some Arabian style of small cap on head. In a few moments my body was wet, and I felt that my body was heavy, that I could not make a sheer move. My hands started shivering. She took some steps forward, came close to me, sat on my bed and put her hand on forehead. After that she said something in some strange language with a pleasant smile on her face. I could not understand a single word but had a feel like she was saying, "Don't be scared of me. I'll do nothing. Sleep. You need that." She started massaging my forehead softly with a lot of love and affection in her eyes. I forgot all my stress. She was continuously saying something like some lady singing a song for her baby. Her voice was soft and touching. I closed my eyes and suddenly the scene came across my mind when I was leaving the home and my mother was weeping and I saw her face for the last time. I started crying. She quickly got up from bed and went to the corner of the cabin. I asked her to come near, but she was so scared that she had done something wrong to me. Suddenly she crossed the bulkhead, partition or separation between 2 cabins, like smoke and disappeared. First time I saw a supernatural thing. I started crying heavily, not because of fear, but this time because she was gone. Also some drinking effect was there. Though nobody was able to hear that at that time of the night, the captain was just passing by. He heard the sound and came inside my cabin. Seeing Captain in my cabin, I stopped crying due to his image, but tears were continuously coming out of my eyes. He asked me what happened, but I was not able to tell. He took me to his cabin, offered me some coke. He talked to me on various topics, and after soothing me a lot, he finally asked me the reason why I was crying as he was expecting this due to some homesickness. I told him the whole story. He was quite angry with the chief officer for not reporting him to such a serious incident. Captain was a Catholic from Mumbai. He told me not to worry and gave me some religious literature with instructions to use. After that, We saw a movie in the captain's day room. In the morning, at 4 o'clock, I left the cabin, and after getting fresh, went on the bridge for my watch. My watch timings were morning and evening 4 to 8. I was quite fresh with new energy. The chief officer asked me about the change. I told him nothing. From that day onwards, I was no more scared, though I strongly believed that some aroma or some energy or something unnatural around me every time. I feel that I'm faster, more powerful, smarter, more enthusiastic than ever. Everything was going just great. Everybody was happy with me due to the change. One evening, Captain asked me if everything is going fine, and after that he advised most shocking thing. Pratap, do not whistle on ships anytime. And that picture flashed before my eyes when I first saw that lady. While smoking, I was whistling loudly, as that is in my habit that if nobody is around me, I start whistling. I was shocked, but after that, everything was not that bad at least. That great soul was not at all dangerous, though she brought me a great change. I never think of her or call her as some devil or boot or something like that, though she's been a great memory to me. It's now almost 6 months. I left Spar Ruby. Due to my mother's constraints, I'm not allowed to join back, and that was my last FG ship. I still remember that gorgeous face with big blue eyes with endless affection.
This story happened in 1974 in my godfather's home. My godfather and godmother lived in a house in the town center, with their 2 young children and the nanny. My godmother had a small shop right in front of the house, which was attached to the house, so if you were sitting outside on the veranda, you could see who was entering or exiting the shop. One day, when my godmother was on her coffee break on the veranda, she saw a tall man walk in her store, wearing a long coat, and he also had a black hat on. She immediately called the nanny to go and see if the man needed any help. The nanny came downstairs only to find that there was nobody in the store. She searched and searched, calling out, "Excuse me, hello, anybody in here, can I help you?" But there was no answer. She went out on the balcony to let my godmother know that there was nobody in there, but my godmother couldn't believe her as she had not seen anybody come out of the shop. After that, days passed and they forgot about the story. In July 1974, a war broke out in Cyprus, so my godmother, who is British, had to take the kids with her and go to England until the war was over. While she was gone, my godfather would sleep on the couch so that if anything would happen, he could escape easier. One night he felt somebody shaking him while he was asleep. He woke up and saw a tall man with a long coat and a black hat standing there on top of him, staring at him. My godfather very calmly asked him if he wanted anything. The man just vanished. About a couple of months later, when my godmother had returned from the UK, she remembered the shop incident and decided to tell her husband. He smiled at her and said, "You've seen him too. I wonder who he is. He doesn't seem harmful." A few days passed and another discussion took place, this time with the nanny. During dinner, she politely asked my godmother if she had been going up to her room in the middle of night to look for something. My godmother was shocked. She denied ever going to the girl's bedroom. Apparently, she could hear somebody come up the stairs every night at about the same time, open her door and start making noise in her bedroom. She just assumed it was a family member. My godmother and godfather just looked at each other and smiled. They knew exactly who it was, but decided not to mention anything to the nanny in case she would be scared. About 6 months later, they had to move because the house was to be demolished. So they found a new house and were soon out of there. The first night at their new house, while they were saying goodnight to the kids and asking them about how they liked their new bedrooms, their little boy Nick turned to his parents and said, "I miss my old room, Mummy. But at least here I'll be able to finally sleep. That tall man won't be here staring at me all night," and everybody smiled. Nobody ever found out who the man was and nobody ever saw him again.
I am here to tell you a story that happened to me about 2 years ago in a neighborhood called Boulieu, in the capital of Algeria, Algiers. I'll start with a background story. In 2015, my family and I moved out of the apartment we lived in for nearly 18 years to a much bigger, newly built house. The apartment was in a closed neighborhood where only families of army officials lived. There were 3 very old buildings that were built by France during the Revolutionary War, and from what I heard all my life from the elders, whatever happened there then and during the Civil War of the 90s was not pretty. Now, since I graduated from high school right before we moved, and since I was accepted in a university that was just 10 minutes away from the apartment, my parents decided to keep the apartment so my mother and I would spend the night there whenever we were too tired to drive over an hour to our new house. I had 3 days when I would finish classes at 6 p.m. and or start classes at 8 a.m. the next morning, so my mom reckoned it would be better to stay in our apartment, which I didn't mind at all, seeing as I was a bit sad and bitter about moving away from my friends and childhood memories. Around 2 months into my first semester, we got used to that routine, spending 3 nights in the apartment and 4 in the new house. Nothing seemed weird until the family that lived below us also suddenly moved out. I knew that family since forever, and the middle daughter and son were both very close to me. They often told me about their dad's drinking addiction, something that was rare in our culture, and how he gets very angry and aggressive when drunk. With thin walls, I didn't need them to tell me more about it. I could pretty much hear the screaming and banging all the time. They spoke a different language, so I never knew what he was yelling about, only recognizing a few curse words I learned from my friends, but I remember clearly that one time I asked the daughter, and she replied with, "He keeps asking someone to stop annoying him." One day, my mother and I were just relaxing on the only bed we left behind in the apartment when we heard a noise downstairs. Gossip was a big thing in such a small neighborhood, so it didn't take long for us to hear that a couple were planning on moving in the apartment below since my friend's family moved away. Before settling down, they sent 2 workers to renovate the place inside. It's very old and many things were broken, so it was understandable. The workers weren't from the capital, so the couple let them spend the nights inside the place until they finished their work. On the first night, my mom and I couldn't sleep. We kept hearing doors slamming non-stop, and by slamming I mean we could feel our own walls shaking with each slam. It went on for the next couple of nights we spent there, and when it was time for us to leave to our house, we told the security guard about it, and he promised to ask the workers to keep it down at night, as the other neighbors asked the same favor. When we came back the next week, the 2 workers came up and knocked on our door. They had apologized first before saying that we needed to know that it wasn't their fault. They explained that they wanted to sleep as much as we did, but the doors inside the apartment kept slamming on their own, and that they tried to lock them thinking it was probably a breeze, but it didn't stop. They said that it was too cold outside, so they decided to just pray until they fell asleep from exhaustion. That terrified both my mom and I. We both heard many stories over the years from our neighbors, but the way these 2 strangers were looking at us, as if begging us to believe them and help somehow. It was honestly scary. That night, the same happened. As well as the next one, and the one after. By that time I had huge circles under my eyes just like everyone else, and I considered never coming back there just because university was close, but I didn't discuss it with my mom yet. Instead, I had some hope when the security guard asked the workers to literally put big nails on the doors and just leave one room open at a time alongside the bathroom. My mom and I left home feeling a bit better. Except, it didn't work. Apparently, on that same night, the workers said that they were about to sleep when they heard the sound of metallic objects hitting the ground one by one. The slamming resumed, and they were about to go crazy. They ended up dragging their mattresses to the staircase and sleeping out there in the cold. The next morning, they went inside to continue working when they froze. They found a pair of pink boots belonging to a little girl put in the middle of the room they were sleeping in. They knew for a fact that the whole place was empty as the previous family took everything with them, and so that was it. They decided to take their tools and leave, letting the couple know that they can't deal with it anymore. The next week when my mom and I came back, and after hearing about what happened, our hopes were crushed. I went to class feeling sick and my mom left to do some shopping. That night I came back home at around 6:15 p.m. and called my mom to see where she was. She said she was caught in traffic and would be back with dinner ASAP. I opened my laptop and started watching videos, keeping a couple of lights on since it was dark outside. First thing I heard was the kitchen window open. My heart almost leaped out of my throat, but it was normal since the old window couldn't hold well anymore unless a lot of strength was applied to close it, which I ran immediately to do. The second thing I heard was my mom's headphones falling from the top of a wooden shelf to the floor, making me jump. At this point, I was sure it was not because of the wind, so I grabbed my phone and texted my best friend. He's someone who believes in ghosts but is never afraid of them, and he was the first person I thought of. As expected, he started making fun of me for being a chicken, but when I heard a bang from another room and voice called him with a shaky voice, he understood that I wasn't okay. He instructed me to open the balcony door and stay close to it so I wouldn't hear a lot of sounds and echo from inside. I wore my jacket and did so, but things kept falling, and I kept shaking. I didn't want to tell my mom since there was no point of scaring her when she was stuck in traffic and couldn't come right away, so I just stayed on the phone with my best friend. My laptop suddenly shut close and I jumped, since it was really close to me, and I started crying. Whatever it was that was causing this was in the room with me. I wanted to go out to the balcony but decided against it. What if it tried to throw me off the building? I wasn't planning on dying anytime soon. When I started hearing banging on the walls around me, I screamed and slid to the floor, sobbing into the phone. I guess the neighbors on the same floor heard me and came running to my door. I could hear their voices calling for me and my mom, but I was too terrified to move. A few minutes later the banging suddenly stopped and I heard the door unlock, and in came my mom running to my side, telling me that it was okay and that she was there. I was clutching on the phone so hard she had a hard time taking it away from me, reassuring my best friend that I was fine, and that I will call when I feel better. My mom took me home that night, not uttering a single word about it. I know she wanted to ask what happened, but I was too out of it to talk. My dad went back to the apartment the next day to bring what was left of our things, and I eavesdropped on him telling my mom that the neighbors were still hearing the door slam at night and that they will bring a Raqi, a Muslim man who uses Quran to chase evil presences away, to take care of this disturbing matter. I came back to that place months later during the day to say a final silent goodbye since I was moving out of the country. I was too scared at first but figured I might as well see the place I grew up at one last time before we give the key to someone else. No one told me what really happened after, or if it all stopped, but when I was walking back to my car, I looked at one spot where I used to spend a lot of time with my friends, and I remembered that time I asked my friend what her father always yells about when drunk. I remembered how she replied with, "He keeps asking someone to stop annoying him," and I stopped in my tracks. It couldn't be a coincidence. Her dad must have been the first victim.
There is a small island in the Mediterranean Sea that does not appear on any map. It cannot be seen from any other island, nor can any other land be seen from it. On this island is a lighthouse, rotting from age and sea water, which is never lit. There is nothing inside it, save for a spiraling staircase that leads to the top, and an ancient, dusty bookcase. The case is filled with unmarked books, bound in ancient leather, save for a single space. If you remove a book from the shelf, it will fling itself open in your hands, and the words inscribed in it shall start screaming to the air. You must wrestle the book closed and shove it back on the shelf, or the immortal evil contained within its pages shall break free, and you will be forced to take its place, with pages, ink and binding crafted from your own flesh and blood. However, if you bring the correct book to the island, and place it in the empty space, the lighthouse will light. As long as it is lit, the world shall enjoy an unending paradise, for all the evil in the world will be contained in the lighthouse. And while it is lit, nothing can go in or out. The only problem, you will be trapped for eternity with all the evil ever known or conceived, by man or God. And the only way to escape is to douse the light.
While based in Gibraltar doing my sailing qualifications, we would regularly sail over to northern Africa and back to clock up miles. I was on a rotating shift as captain on a trip to Melilla with one teacher and 4 other students. I had been seeing empty water bottles bobbing in waves for some time. Although trash in the Mediterranean is unfortunately common, this had caught my attention. Just as dinner was being served, I noticed something on the horizon directly in front of us. As we got closer, it became apparent that it was a life raft full of migrants trying to get to Europe. With no shelter and no means of propulsion, it was about 40 people just bobbing around in the sea miles from any coastline. A very serious group discussion began to take place about what action we were about to undertake. We were 6 people on a 38-feet sailing boat, days from the closest port with limited resources and no radio contact at the time. Do we change course and try to make radio contact and raise the alarm? Do we make contact with the group and provide what assistance we can until help arrives? Do we attempt to tow them back into a port on the African coast, the closest land, and risk guaranteed arrest upon arrival? We closed to about 2 miles and I dropped the sails and began motoring to stay within close visual contact with the group as we continued to discuss what to do next. I was strongly arguing to make contact and tow the raft back to port, as you never leave some at sea. Every sailor knows you render all possible help when it's safe to do so. Consequences can be dealt with after everybody's safely ashore. We were close enough to see the fear and doubt on each other's face when out of the haze came a 70-feet Spanish Coast Guard vessel to save the day. They pulled up alongside the life raft, dropped a net over the side, and had everybody climb aboard. Although we had been trying to make radio contact and sending out emergency transmissions constantly in both English and Spanish, the Coast Guard never acknowledged us, either before or after they arrived on the scene. Once everybody was aboard, they promptly turned back towards Spain and powered off into the haze from which they'd come. We dodged an international incident that day, and I will never forget how lucky I am to be born in the country I'm from.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.